تفضل أستاذ هاني.
مساء الخير، نرحب بكم جميعا في هذه الندوة الثالثة في سياق برنامج ينظمه مركز مسارات بالشراكة مع مبادرة إدارة الأزمات الفنلندية، وضمن برنامج دعم الصمود عبر الحوار الذي يموله الاتحاد الأوروبي، وذلك حول الانتخابات ودور المجتمع الدولي والمواقف الدولية إزاء الانتخابات الفلسطينية. هذه الانتخابات التي طال انتظارها، وهي حق أساسي يمارسه الشعب الفلسطيني بعد غياب طويل، ونتمنى أن تعقد بشكل منتظم، لأنه بدون الاحتكام للشعب لا يمكن توفر المؤسسات التي تقوم بالمحاسبة والمساءلة والحكم الرشيد، ونحن بحاجة له، خاصة في الظروف الخاصة التي يمر بها الشعب الفلسطيني. المتحدث في هذه الندوة هو متحدث عزيز علينا، لأنه ممثل الاتحاد الأوروبي السيد سفين فون بورغسدورف، وهو صديق للفلسطينيين مثلما الاتحاد الأوروبي صديق للفلسطينيين، يحاول جاهدا دعمهم حتى يستطيعوا أن يصمدوا، حتى يستطيعوا أن يتقدموا على طريق تحقيق يعني الأهداف الفلسطينية، بتحقيق الاستقلال الوطني الفلسطيني لدولة فلسطين وبقية الحقوق الفلسطينية. موضوعنا اليوم موضوع هام، وهو يتعلق بالانتخابات، وخاصة أننا دخلنا في العملية الانتخابية، حيث بدأت القوائم التي ستتنافس بالانتخابات تقدم نفسها، وسينتهي الموعد في نهاية هذا الشهر. وبالتالي هذه العملية التي من المأمول أن تؤدي إلى تغيير ملموس في الوضع الفلسطيني، لأن قيمة الانتخابات أنها تتيح التجديد والتغيير. إذا لم تتيح ذلك فهي تكون مجرد يعني حفاظ على الأمر الواقع، والأمر الواقع سيء، بحاجة إلى تجديد، بحاجة إلى تغيير، بحاجة يعني إلى إصلاح. إذا تناولنا المواقف الدولية سنجد أن الاتحاد الأوروبي والأمم المتحدة والولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، إضافة إلى بقية الدول سواء في مجلس الأمن أو على امتداد العالم، معظم دول العالم تؤيد الحقوق الفلسطينية، ولكنها لا تمارس الضغوط اللازمة على الاحتلال، لا تمارس الضغوط الكافية لتنفيذ القرارات الدولية، لتنفيذ الشرعية الدولية، وهذا يجعل الصراع يستمر وتتفاقم الأوضاع أكثر وأكثر. على سبيل المثال، الإدارة الأمريكية حتى الآن لا تتخذ موقفا واضحا بالنسبة للانتخابات، فهي تقوم بدور الفحص وتقدم رسائل تعكس نوع من التحفظات، كما لاحظنا بالتوصية التي رفعها كبار الباحثين في معهد واشنطن للإدارة الأمريكية في 15 من شهر آذار، والتي قيل أن الإدارة الأمريكية تبنتها، وهي تريد أن ترسل رسالة للسلطة الفلسطينية وللقيادة الفلسطينية قبل إجراء الانتخابات، حتى تأخذ يعني هذه الرسالة في الحسبان قبل إجراء الانتخابات. ملخص هذه الرسالة أنهم لا يريدون تكرار تجربة 2006 حينما فازت حماس بالانتخابات، وحينما تم مقاطعتها من الولايات المتحدة ومن المجتمع الدولي. وهذا الأمر طبعا يتناقض مع طبيعة الانتخابات، لأن الانتخابات يجب أن تكون حرة ونزيهة وتحترم نتائجها، والشعب يختار من يريد. لا يمكن أن نفرض على الشعب أن يختار فئة أو فريق ولا يختار فريق آخر، يجب أن نحترم نتائج الانتخابات، وهذا أمر يعني في منتهى الأهمية. أما إذا قلنا أن على السلطة الفلسطينية أن تقوم بكذا وكذا، وأن تعترف وتستمر بالاعتراف بشروط اللجنة الرباعية، رغم أن الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية على سبيل المثال لا تمارس أي ضغط على يعني إسرائيل لكي تلتزم بأي شيء، لا بالقانون الدولي ولا بقرارات الشرعية الدولية، وتمارس توسيع الاستيطان وتمارس فرض الحقائق الاحتلالية على الأرض. إذا نحن يعني نريد يعني تحرك بالمجتمع الدولي. إذا أردتوا أن تفرضوا شروط، افرضوا شروط على المحتل الذي يتنكر للقوانين الدولية وللشرعية الدولية. ولماذا يتم فرض الشروط على الطرف الخاضع للاحتلال؟ هذه مسألة يعني نطرحها يعني على يعني ممثل الاتحاد الأوروبي. كذلك يعني نطرح على الاتحاد الأوروبي مسألة ضرورة الاعتراف بالدولة الفلسطينية، هذه الدولة التي هي حق تاريخي وحق طبيعي ومعترف بها منذ قرار يعني التقسيم في عام 1967 ومعترف فيها من أكثر من 140 دولة. هذا من شأنه أن يساعد حتى بمسألة إجراء الانتخابات لكي تحد من تدخلات الاحتلال في الانتخابات. كما نلاحظ أن الاحتلال يتدخل بشكل قوي في العملية الانتخابية، ونريد موقف أوروبي وموقف دولي يعني إزاء هذا الأمر لكي تكون هذه الانتخابات حرة ونزيهة. كما نريد من الاتحاد الدولي أن يتدخل حتى في الانتهاكات الفلسطينية لحرية ونزاهة الانتخابات، سواء من خلال الاعتقالات التي تقوم بها إسرائيل أو بعض الإجراءات التي تمارس من السلطة الفلسطينية وتمس بالحقوق الدستورية للناخبين الفلسطينيين، يعني سواء فيما يتعلق باستقالة الموظفين أو سن الترشح وغير ذلك من القضايا المهمة، حتى يتم مشاركة واسعة خاصة من الشباب. حوالي 1,000,000 فلسطيني لن يتمكنوا من الترشح من الشباب لأن سن الترشح 28 سنة. كذلك نريد من الاتحاد الأوروبي ومن المجتمع الدولي أن يمارسوا الضغط على إسرائيل التي قامت بتطعيم معظم سكانها وستنتهي من تطعيم كل سكانها، بينما الشعب الذي تحتله ليس يتحمل المسؤولية عن تطعيمه، واهتمت فقط بالعمال الذين يشتغلون في إسرائيل، وهذا أمر في منتهى العنصرية. هذا أيضا يجب أن نرى تدخلا، وأنا استقيت بعض هذه المسائل التي سنضعها الآن على الشات، يعني تبين بعض القضايا التي يثيرها يعني الفلسطينيين عندما يتم يعني تناول موضوع دور الاتحاد الأوروبي. الاتحاد الأوروبي صديق كبير للفلسطينيين، داعم كبير للفلسطينيين، ولكننا نريد أكثر لأننا في وضع سيء جدا، لا نريد أن يحدث انهيار، خاصة أن البرنامج الذي ننفذه هو يستهدف الصمود الفلسطيني وتعزيز الصمود الفلسطيني، وهذا يكون من خلال العمل من أجل عملية سياسية جادة قادرة على تحقيق السلام، سلام حقيقي وليس عملية سياسية بدون سلام مثل ما حدث خلال يعني عشرات السنين الماضية. نرحب مرة أخرى بالصديق ممثل الاتحاد الأوروبي وندعوه للكلام، يستطيع أن يتحدث 20 دقيقة إلى 30 دقيقة، وبعد ذلك نفتح يعني باب الأسئلة والمداخلات على أن تزيد المداخلة عن دقيقتين إلى 3 دقائق، وبعد ذلك يعقب تعقيب أخير على أن تنتهي الندوة خلال مدة أقصاها 1.5 ساعة. أهلا بكم وشكرا لكم. تفضل صديقي سفين لتقديم مداخلتك.
Yes, dear Hadi Al-Masri, thank you very much for your introductory remarks. I'm going to start my video so you can see me. Great. I hope the translation functions. Very good. Great to see you and great to be on this call. I feel honored to be with you here. Now, allow me to quickly underline the view of the European Union as far as the first democratic elections in more than 15 years is concerned, and then I try to speak as well to the points, the 5 or 6 issues you raised. I'm not sure you can see me, by the way. I don't know. Can you see me? Yes, you can see me. Okay, let me just. Yeah. Wonderful, great. Okay, wonderful. I should go to the hairdresser, as a matter of fact. My hair is getting too long. I have no reasons, not because the pandemic is over, at least because here in East Jerusalem we have one. But allow me to say we are very pleased with the fact that President Abbas has issued a decree to hold the first democratic elections in more than 15 years. This is a historic moment, and I personally believe, and this is shared by my headquarters in Brussels and many, many member states in Europe as well, that this is a historic opportunity. It's about time to renew the democratic legitimacy of the Palestinian. It's about time to end the split between West Bank and Gaza. It is time to end the divide between Fatah and Hamas. It's time to ensure that democracy governs the Palestinian territory. And so you have in the European Union really a partner in crime when it comes to restoring democracy all across Palestinian territory. We call, and we have been calling for years, for free, fair, and inclusive election. That is our viewpoint, and we remain steadfast in this calling for this to happen. Now, this is part and parcel of our belief that the quest for self-determination of the Palestinian people is best served through a democratic process, through the election of democratically elected leaders. So, you know, this is part and parcel also of the overall peace process. The Palestinian cause can best be defended if you have a united Palestinian leadership, which spans across from Jordan all the way to Mediterranean, which also includes East Jerusalem. Only if you have that, it would be easier for you to engage with the Israeli authorities and the international community to restart, to relaunch the peace process, which, as you know, has been stalled for far too many years, while we observe a creeping annexation every day. So democracy and democratic legitimacy is key, is critical to restoring, to reinvigorating the peace process. In that context, we truly believe that the democratic elections are also a first stepping stone towards reconciliation between the major political factions, between the people which far too long have been living in the West Bank and in Gaza in separated silos because of the occupation, because of the siege on Gaza, and because, of course, of the fact that Fatah and Hamas don't see eye to eye on how to run the Palestinian territory. And let's be very clear about that. The European Union and the international community only recognize the Palestinian Authority as the sole and legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. So for us, this is a moment whereby we can restore the legitimacy of the entire Palestinian leadership over the entirety of the Palestinian territory. This is also important to give credence and give support to our state building process. Ever since Oslo, we have been sending billions of euros and dollars into the state building process. And the state building process means the establishment of democratic institutions, means the separation of powers between the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary branch. And because of the past 15 years of not having had a Palestinian legislative assembly, a true parliament, because of that, there was a clear bias towards the executive power, undermining the separation of powers. One more important reason why we need to have a parliament to hold accountable the executive, to hold accountable what the government does, what the president does. And I think we all can agree on that. And I also know that President Abbas agrees to that. So we are, of course, support all the political factions in Palestine to fully embark on this electoral process, to abide by the democratic principles, to commit to holding free, fair, and inclusive elections, to ensure that there is a level playing field for all parties, for all candidates, for all those appearing on the list. And very importantly, come election day, to unequivocally support the outcome of the electoral contest and agree to it and support it. That is very important. Democracy can only function if we all agree that the electoral outcome is fully respected by all parties. That is the very essence of democracy. Without that, we don't need that. We have, of course, been calling upon the Israeli authorities to hold elections all across the Palestinian territory. And if you don't know what I mean by that the West Bank, I mean Gaza, and I mean, of course, East Jerusalem. We have said so publicly. The spokesperson of Mr. Borrell, the HRVP of the European Union, has said so shortly after President Abbas has issued this decree. And I have said so in various public meetings to the media, to journalists, and to Palestinian interlocutors. So that for us is very clear. There is a clear obligation also under the Oslo Agreement. I have even if you want to see it, it's this agreement which has been signed in Oslo '94 between the PLO and the Israeli authorities regarding the holding of elections. And that is very clearly said that it covers the entirety of the Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, with clear specific recommendations and agreements on where and how to do it. We, as you know, are also part and parcel of the electoral monitoring process. As a matter of fact, under the Oslo Agreement, we have been mandated to coordinate international observation. Rest assured that we will try our utmost to ensure that the European Union be in a position to effectively monitor the elections. I personally will assist in my capacity as the local diplomat on the ground through a diplomatic watch exercise. We are going to mobilize all the European Union and other missions, international missions, accredited to Jerusalem and Ramallah to facilitate that in addition to international observers. So I think, let me start here on the sort of general remarks. And if you agree with me, Ali Al-Masri, I would like to quickly come back to the 5 or 6 points I have noted here in your expose. And be mindful, please, of my limitations as a diplomat. While you're an activist, an academic, a human rights sort of analyst, in my position as a diplomat, I have to weigh very carefully what I'm going to say, especially in a public meeting like that one. I trust this is an internal meeting, but I still have to want to remain a friend of Palestine for years to come and not be expelled tomorrow. So as a result of which, I'll be very carefully wording my remarks here. Now, on your first point, I noted, you said that how come that we impose conditions, you refer to the quartet principles or conditions on parties. Well, dear Hani, you know, we are in 2021. That, what you quoted, was in 2006, meaning 15 years ago. To my knowledge, the European Union has not issued yet any statement to that effect. To my knowledge, the only statement which has been issued by the EU was the spokesperson's statement in January after Mr. Abbas having issued the decree, where he called for free, fair, and inclusive elections, and he called on all political factions in Palestine to abide by democratic principles. I have been asked, it was about, I think 6 weeks ago, in Ramallah by a number of journalists, both domestic, regional, international, on how the EU would react to a government where Hamas would be represented. And my response was very simple, and I restate this response. Let's not put the cart before the horse. What is most important now is to ensure that elections can take place. What is most important now is to ensure that we have a maximum number of Palestinians participating in these elections, women and youth, independents, people of all age, professions, and denominations. And once come the polling day, the contest will be then actually called on. Then we see what that new government will say and will do. And then let's discuss how best to re-engage with that government. And the EU has not taken a position on this matter. So whatever you have referred to relates to 2006. It does not relate to 2021. 21. I want you and I want all the participants on this call to fully understand this statement. Secondly, the recognition of the Palestinian state. Now, I represent the European Union, 27 member states here in Palestine. The European Union, because of its supranational character, cannot take a position on the recognition under international law of a single third party like the Palestinian state without having received the consent of all 27, meaning we need unanimity by all 27 member states to be able to pronounce ourselves as European Union in support of statehood of Palestine. We have several other cases like Kosovo, where we have dissenting views within the European Union, and as a result of which we cannot pronounce ourselves in that respect. Recognition of statehood is a prerogative of individual member states. It is not a prerogative of the European Union. And I repeat again, once we have 27 agreeing to it, the European Union, myself, my bosses in Brussels can say so. For the time being, we cannot. And this is abundantly clear also to the Palestinian authorities, to President Abbas and others. Thirdly, yes, to pressure Israel into allowing elections to take place in East Jerusalem. As I said, we have early on in a spokesperson's statement in Brussels referred to that, where it's literally said, we call upon the Israeli authorities to facilitate the holding of elections, democratic elections, all across Palestinian territory. And when he was asked what that means, he said, West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem. And I restate this here in full confidence. So we will continue doing so. We will continue calling upon Israel come election day or even before and say, this is your obligation. And if you read the Oslo Agreement, the annex, let me just quote the title of this document of the Oslo Agreement that we're on the same page. It's the Israeli-Palestinian Interim Agreement on the West Bank of the Gaza Strip and Annex 2 Protocol concerning elections. If you need be, I can quote you the respective articles on that one, where it's noir sur blanc, clearly written on paper, what the obligations are of all parties, including the Israeli parties. And we will, of course, use all relevant measures, diplomatic outreach, public pressure, et cetera, in order to ensure that all parties, all stakeholders adhere to the agreements signed in Oslo 27 years ago. And then we have, of course, the fifth key point you mentioned, Hani, that is the vaccination. Now, this is complicated. Yesterday, I don't know whether you followed media events, Prime Minister Steyer, Public Health Minister Dr. Mai Kaila, and myself and Tor Wennesland, the UN Special Coordinator, we all assisted in the launching of the Palestine National Vaccine Deployment Plan. And I deliberately used that opportunity to recall the importance of democratic elections, and so did the UN Special Coordinator, and also the Prime Minister referred to it. Now, this aspect of vaccination has a number of angles. Let me start first with the angle of international law. Under international humanitarian law, indeed, the occupier, that means Israel, is responsible for maintaining the public health of the people under their responsibility, which they are supposed to protect and care for. Now, in that respect, in that reading of the Fourth Geneva Convention, one would assume that Israel would have to do it. Now, under the Oslo Agreement, public health objectives have been transferred to the Palestinian Authority in those areas where they're responsible, meaning area A and B. So there is a bit of a diversion of responsibility. However, it is the view of the European Union and most members of the international community that the occupying power still has an overall responsibility of providing public health in all areas, which includes, by the way, as well Gaza and Area C. But irrespective of our view, You know that right now efforts are ongoing through the PA, which has procured tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands doses of vaccine. You know that the COVAX facility, which foresees that up to 20% of the population in Palestine, both in Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem, will be vaccinated for free under this internationally managed facility, COVAX, where the EU, by the way, and I tell this to all those who don't know this, where the EU is the major contributor. We have been supporting an amount of 1 billion euros, and together with our member states, even of 2.2 billion euros, in order to ensure that all countries which have a low or middle income revenue base, including Palestine, can be vaccinated at least at 20%. In addition to that, the Palestinian Authority has commissioned 2 million of doses of AstraZeneca, and as you know, both Russian and Chinese vaccination medications are on the way as well. So I think in addition to that, the Israelis have vaccinated about 120,000 Palestinian workers on checkpoints, and discussions are ongoing to vaccinate a further 25,000 health workers. So, you know, there is cooperation going on. I think there could be better cooperation between the Israelis and the Palestinians. I also think the Israelis could indeed do more to vaccinate under international humanitarian law all Palestinians, but that's a decision which, again, is not fully resolved in the discussions between the Palestinians and the Israelis. I am confident that over the next few months, a critical number of Palestinians will be vaccinated. Now, why is this important in the context of elections? It's not only important that we have public health and people are safe in order to, you know, develop what we call a herd immunity against this vicious virus. It's not only important because we need to restore prosperity and economic life here in Palestine, where people can go to their employment, can open up their business, make money, then pay taxes. It's very important for the PA to have a revenue base which is more sustainable. It is also important for the democratic process, in order to be sure that the candidates can freely go around and talk to people, launch their campaigns, right? And also that the voters can, with a sufficient degree of safety, cast their ballots on the 22nd of May for the parliamentary and on the 31st of July for the presidential election. So in that respect, I believe there's an intrinsic link between public health, economic uptake, and democratic process here. And indeed, the vaccination is key to all of that. Allow me to make one last comment regarding the importance of ensuring that in the electoral process, also women, youth, and more independent voices can be heard and can be part and parcel of the candidate lists. Now, you have certainly, as much as I and my international colleagues have done, followed very closely the recent developments in Cairo. And you know that both the Central Election Commission and other independent factions, not the big ones, the independent factions have all called for further amendments to the electoral law in order to ensure that the age limit from 28 can be lowered, so the 1 million of sort of possible young voters can actually be not also candidates, not just voters, but also candidates. That the number of women can be increased even further, which was from 20 to 26 and even further. And very importantly, that all those who wish to be part of the candidate list do not have to resign from their positions, for instance, boards of NGOs, public office holders, etc. That indeed is also a concern for us, and we have mentioned this to the authorities, and we share the concern with many, many human rights and civil society activists. We share this concern with the CEC. Now, as you know, on the 16th and 17th in Cairo, these proposals have not been agreed upon by the factions. And since the factions in Cairo have not agreed upon it, they have not recommended to President Abbas, amending the electoral law, despite what we consider to be unsatisfactory elements in the existing legal framework. But, you know, if the factions don't agree, what can we do? So in a way, this is a bit problematic, but I share the concern. I share the concern of you, but that's where we are. So let me just show whether I have covered most of your points. Yes, I think I've covered more or less of your points. Very happy to take on further questions or comments, and I trust I stayed within the time limits given to me. Thank you very much.
شكرا عزيزي، فعلا غطيت نقاط كثيرة وخصوصا التي أثرناها يعني على الشات، وأوضحت يعني الموقف. نحن الآن نفتح باب الأسئلة والملاحظات والتعليقات للزملاء الحضور. نأمل أن نلتزم بدقيقتين إلى 3 دقائق، ونبدأ بالعزيز معتصم الأشهب، فليتفضل.
Well, good evening. Thank you very much, dear Hani. Thank you very much, مسارات, and thank you, Mr. von Bورغسدورف. My name is Mu'tasim al-Ashhab, and I speak here in my capacity as a Palestinian citizen. The European Union, and allow me, Mr. von Bورغسdorf, to quote you, has been calling for free and fair elections. And the European Union was one of the parties that encouraged the Palestinians to conduct elections. And the EU announced very early after the president announcement its encouragement and its support for the Palestinian approach to holding Palestinian elections, because elections are something which is consistent with the values advocated by the European Union. And this is a stance which is very welcomed by the Palestinian community. Now, for several days, we have been hearing about Israeli threats to prevent the holding of elections in Palestine. My question, what is the European position and reaction to these Israeli threats, which could lead to the suspension or even the cancellation of the elections? Because the lack of a European position and a lack of a European action on Israeli obstacles, especially the threats, would mean that the European Union is betraying the position and the values on which it is based on. Thanks.
I suggest that I wait for more questions.
الإجابة على هذا السؤال. تفضل للإجابة.
Are there more questions or comments, or do you want me to reply immediately?
لأنه لم ألاحظ أن أحد طلب الكلمة، فيستطيع الإجابة.
Yes, thank you very much. Mudassan Alasha, thank you very much. By the way, you pronounce my name very well. Very few people say von Bورغsdorf. Great. Well, either you must have sort of been in Germany, or you know how to pronounce German names, which is very good. So kudos to you. Now, we of course heard about these. Now, we have not been informed directly by the Israeli authorities that they do not want the holding of elections in Palestine. We were informed through third parties, we read it in the press. I have been informed through PA sources, but I have not heard it directly. If, for instance, an Israeli official of political responsibility were to publicly or privately tell us that Israel objects to the elections, we would, of course, clearly go against it with all our diplomatic means. Why? because we would say, Mrs. or Mr., whatever the name is, you signed up to this in 1994. You cannot unilaterally declare of not wanting to hold elections. On what grounds? What is your legal or even political base for that? There is none. And since there is none, you cannot just say, I'm not doing it. You're violating international law. So again, I have not been subject to such a message, nor have been witness to such a message, nor anyone of the European Union here in Tel Aviv or in Brussels or in New York for that matter, has been addressed with that kind of comment. So I can only say we would clearly object to it and would clearly protest against it. So that's my simple answer to that. And of course, if these sort of rumors were to materialize, and of course I'm having, as you can imagine, very regular meetings with the Palestinian Authority and other members of the political establishment in Palestine. If this were to be confirmed, we will take necessary action. Thank you.
شكرا. الآن لدي ثلاثة أو أربعة يريدان الأسئلة. نبدأ بالأخ حسام، فلتتفضل. حسام.
مساء الخير، هيك مسموع؟
مسموع، تفضل.
مسموع. لدي سؤالين بشكل مباشر. إسرائيل قد لا تعترض على الانتخابات بشكل علني، ولكن قد تكون القدس إشكالية. هل الاتحاد الأوروبي سيتدخل في حال منعت إسرائيل إجراء الانتخابات داخل القدس وتوجه المقترعين المقدسيين في مراكز اقتراع داخل القدس؟ ثانياً، بخصوص المحكمة الدولية، هناك إجراءات الآن أصبحت علنية، وإسرائيل ترد بأنها تسحب الVIP وتسحب التصاريح من الشخصيات المهمة في السلطة الوطنية في محاولة للتضييق. هل الاتحاد الأوروبي لديه موقف واضح اتجاه المحكمة الدولية والإجراءات والتوجه نحوها لمعاقبة الاحتلال الإسرائيلي والضباط الذين قاموا بعمليات ضد الفلسطينيين والعزال؟ شكرا.
شكرا. الدكتور جاد إسحاق.
تحياتي. I have three comments which I would like to throw about. The first one is that the Oslo Agreement was presented to the UN, so it's a binding agreement, and Israel should abide by the stipulations in Annex 2 and allow all Palestinians to participate. Otherwise, this is a very clear violation of a UN and an agreement. The second thing is, while we do not interfere in Israeli politics, Israel is allowing itself by sending somebody from Shibet to meet with Abu Mazen and tell him, here are the conditions, you cannot have a joint party with Hamas, we cannot accept even the outcome, we cannot accept a unity government. This is, very troubling, because it means that Israel wants the elections to serve its interests and not the Palestinian interests. The third thing is, you mentioned you are a diplomat, Sven, but I think saying that the PNA is the sole representative of the Palestinian people, this is not true. The real truth is that it's the PLO which is the sole representative of the Palestinian people and not the PA. The PA is a conduit only. Thank you.
شكرا. وفاء عبد الرحمن، تفضلي.
Yes.
I hope. Can you hear me? تمام.
Yes.
أول شيء مساء الخير thank you مسارات. I have a straightforward question which is a concern to the Palestinians all the time. The outcome of whatever elections that are going to be held. The unity government. Will we face the same scenario that happened in 2006? I'm asking this question again because I want to connect it with the conditions, the terrorist list that the EU has, which force the civil society to sign, where the names of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, PFLP, and other political parties are listed as terrorists. Will the EU accept the outcome if Hamas wins the election, if a unity government is formed of all political parties that you consider terrorist parties? This is my first question. My second, the PA has been claiming that there has been pressure from the EU to hold elections. Is that true? We heard very briefly Merkel talking about elections, very briefly, but we didn't feel it's a pressure, but the PA sources say there was a pressure. Given the situation, given the environment under which the elections are held, personally speaking, I don't see a fair and free elections. It's not about the voting. It's about the presidential decrees that are changing the political system. It's the occupation and the policies. It's the division between Gaza and West Bank. It's the deprivation of access for me, not only for the candidates, for me who's working in the media and wants to be moving between Gaza and the West Bank. Do you think this is a fair elections or it's whatever, voting and we finish with this headache of the Palestinians?
شكرا. رياض الشيخ.
استاذ هاني، بس مداخله صغيره، بطلب بس من الجميع اللي بده يعمل مداخله باللغه الانجليزيه ما يكونش حاطط اللغه على شاينيز للي بده يحكي باللغه العربيه بكون حاطط اللغه على شاينيز، اللي بده يتحدث باللغه الانجليزيه يحول اللغه على انجليش عشان يقدروا الناطقين بالغير اللغه العربيه يقدروا يسمعونا. شكرا.
تفضل الاخ رياض الشيخ.
No, I heard the English very well, thank you.
اوكي.
مساء الخير، سامعيني؟
نعم.
بس بعد اذنكم انا عندي سؤال بسيط بخصوص يعني احنا لغايه اليوم ما في توجه واضح بعمل انتخابات في القدس، وزي ما بنعرف ان الانتخابات الفلسطينيه تمت بضغوط دوليه اكثر ما هي داخليه، فشو دور الاتحاد الاوروبي لانهاء موضوع جدليه الانتخابات داخل مدينه القدس وحق المقدسيين في الانتخابات؟ النقطة الثانية زي ما تفضل الأخ أستاذ سفين، أوكي، حكى إنه الاتحاد الأوروبي مسؤوليته يراقب العملية الانتخابية من ناحية التصويت والدعاية الانتخابية، ولكن ما رأيه بالمناخ الانتخابي الحالي اللي من قبل الدعاية الانتخابية؟ على سبيل المثال اليوم الدكتور ناصر القدوة أطلق تصريح إنه لغاية الآن لم يتمكن من فتح حساب بنكي لإيداع المبلغ الخاص بالقائمة الخاصة له. هل يا ترى في الاتحاد الأوروبي يتمتع بأدوات مشان يراقب العملية الانتخابية من الآن ويشجع إنها تكون فيها نوع من المساواة والنزاهة؟ آخر نقطة بس بدي أوضح لها، أستاذ سفين تطرق لموضوع الفصائل لم تطلب تعديل القانون الانتخابي، وهذا السبب بأنه العمر لا ترشيح الشباب 28 ونسبة قائمة المرأة لم يعدل. أنا هذا سؤالي حيكون سؤال مزدوج برضه للأستاذ هاني، هل هاي المعلومة صحيحة بما أنك حضرت اجتماع الفصائل، وبنفس الوقت هل هو خطأ الفصائل إنها لم تطلب أم إنه المرسوم الرئاسي هو اللي حدد الموضوع هذا؟ وشكرا لكم.
الأخ مصطفى إبراهيم.
مساء الخير، يعطيكم العافية. يعني أبدأ أحكي بخصوص الرباعية الدولية والشروط اللي ما زالت ربما كانت قائمة في 2006 وعلى أثر 2006، وفي حديث عن تجديد الرباعية اللي لها سمعة سيئة للأسف عند الفلسطينيين، خاصة أنه الاتحاد الأوروبي عضو فاعل فيها والتزم بالشروط، واللي إسرائيل كانت وضعت جزء من هذه الشروط والتزمت فيها. أعتقد أيضا الشروط اللي بيضعها الاتحاد الأوروبي على تمويله، الأستاذ سفين بيحكي عن أنه دعم الأحزاب الفلسطينية بالتوجه إلى الانتخابات، وما زالت هناك أيضا قيود على منظمات المجتمع المدني وتوقيع على قائمة على ما يسمى بنبذ الإرهاب. يعني حتى الاتحاد الأوروبي في كثير من بياناته للأسف خلال السنوات الماضية لم يكن مؤثرا كثيرا على إسرائيل، وموضوع اللقاحات ما زالت قائمة. ربما المجتمع الدولي كان مطالب أكثر بالضغط على إسرائيل في توفير اللقاحات، وخاصة أنه ما في أمل حتى الآن تتوفر لقاحات ل4.5 مليون فلسطيني. إذا توفرت لنا 3 مليون بكون منيح. ومعظم اللقاحات يعني إسرائيل كونها قوة احتلال وفق اتفاقية جنيف الرابعة أيضا عليها مسؤولية كبيرة. ثاني شيء، شو موقف الاتحاد الأوروبي من توجه الفلسطينيين للمحكمة الجنائية الدولية؟ وبعض دول الاتحاد الأوروبي صحيح أنهم بمولوا المحكمة، وفي منهم إسرائيل بتستخدمهم في الضغط على المحكمة من أجل التراجع أو الضغط عليها أكثر فيما يتعلق بالتحقيق، بدل ما أن الاتحاد الأوروبي يؤمن بمعاييره المتعلقة بحقوق الإنسان وملاحقة مجرمي الحرب وإنصاف ضحايا العدوانات الإسرائيلية المتكررة أيضا والاستيطان. أعتقد أنه موقف الاتحاد الأوروبي غير يعني مش موحد في هذا الموضوع. هناك دول بتضغط على المحكمة الجنائية الدولية استجابة للدبلوماسية الإسرائيلية والضغوط الإسرائيلية. شكرا.
شكرا. فراس بريوش، بعدين بنعطي للسيد سفين الرد. تفضل فراس.
زيد فضلك، تحياتي للجميع. أنا استفساري الأول عن ما هو دور الاتحاد الأوروبي في التجاوزات الغير قانونية في مراسيم اللي أصدرها رئيس السلطة التنفيذية محمود عباس، اللي خالف فيها القانون الفلسطيني الأساسي وخالف فيها الحقوق المواطنة والحقوق العامة للشعب الفلسطيني اللي كفلها الدستور وصدقت عليها السلطة بانتمائها للمنظمات والدولية تحت قانون الأمم المتحدة. كيف يراقب الاتحاد الأوروبي هذه المراسيم التي تجاوزت القانون وتجاوزت حقوق الشعب الفلسطيني، وهي كثيرة وليس هنا مجال لتعدادها؟ السؤال الثاني، لماذا لم يحدد الاتحاد الأوروبي المبالغ أو لم يتطرق إلى المبالغ المالية الكبيرة التي فرضت، مع أنه قال الاتحاد الأوروبي أنه هو يدعم الانتخابات ووفر لها مبنى والشرطة الفلسطينية تأخذ رواتبها، مش راح يجيبوا يعني موظفين جداد وعينوهم على انتخابات، والمراقبين من الأحزاب والقوائم. فلماذا لم نسمع من الاتحاد الأوروبي أي تعليق على اعتراض الشعب الفلسطيني على الرسوم الباهظة اللي هي $20,000 على القوائم؟ وشكرا.
شكرا. أنا بدي أرد على الجزء اللي بتعلق فيه بالسؤال، وبقول بحوار القاهرة اللي عقد في 8 و9 أشباط اتفقت الفصائل على رفع التوصيات، وهو مفترض ما ترفع توصيات لأنه كل الفصائل يعني هذا موقف إجماع فلسطيني يجب أن يتم الاستجابة له، ولكن هي اختارت أن ترفع التوصيات إلى الرئيس حول عدد من القضايا كان بإجماع الحاضرين، ولكن بكل أسف لم يتم الاستجابة لهذه التوصيات اللي كانت تتعلق بأشياء أساسية: رسوم التسجيل والتأمين، تخفيضها، سن الترشح للشباب، رفع نسبة تمثيل المرأة، الاستقالات، عدم المحكومية. تم بجزء فقط التعامل مع عدم المحكومية، ولكن في الحوار القاهرة الأخير لم يتم يعني الأخذ بهذه التوصيات على أساس أنه لا يجوز إجراء تعديلات أثناء العملية الانتخابية، وهذا غير صحيح لأنه دائما يجري تعديلات، خاصة إذا كانت التعديلات المطلوبة تعزز حرية ونزاهة الانتخابات وتعزز الحق الدستوري. لو تعديلات تقيد أو تسيء أو تقلل من الحق الدستوري كان يمكن أن يكون هناك نقاش حولها، ولكن هذه التعديلات كلها كما لاحظنا تعزز الحق الدستوري. هذا هو الذي يعني، وللأسف الفصائل وافقت، لأنه بصراحة ما تتفق عليه فتح وحماس يصبح هو القرار. ممكن يعترض بعض الفصائل أو يتحفظوا، ولكن العملية تجري بهذا الشكل. شكرا. تفضل أستاذ سفين.
Yes, thank you very much. Good. Yes, I will try to go one by one, starting with Mr. Mohammed. Regarding his comment on East Jerusalem, will the EU intervene if Israel objects to holding elections there? And I think I replied to that question already. Indeed, we will try to use our diplomatic and political means to convince our Israeli partners and friends and colleagues that this is part of their obligations under the Oslo Agreement. And I think I said this so. As you know, under the Oslo Agreement, under the annex I quoted, a number of Palestinians residing in East Jerusalem will have to vote under the agreement in postal offices. That is the understanding. And I'm not going to speculate whether this is possible or not for the time being. That is the agreement entered into by the PLO and by the Israeli authorities. By the way, talking about the PLO, there was a lapsus early on. I said the PA is the legitimate representative. I meant the PLO, of course. You're entirely right at having corrected me. That's clear. I meant the PLO, not the PA. The PA is the arm under the Oslo Agreement to execute government policies in that respect. So then you referred, Mr. Mohammed, to the ICC and Foreign Minister Malki returning from his talks in Europe, and that his VIP treatment has been revoked by Israel. This is I'm afraid to say, bilateral matter. I regret any kind of complications in the relations between Israel and Palestinian Authority, because what we need right now at this critical stage is confidence, restoring trust, and confidence-building measures. I would not call this a confidence-building measure, and I will also try to see Foreign Minister Malki soon, next week or shortly thereafter, to understand what has happened. But as I said, this is an issue which is at the discretion of the Israeli authorities, where I think we cannot intervene as such. Mr. Jad Isaac, you referred to the meeting which was reported in the media between President Abbas and the head of Shabak. How can we accept this? Again, I repeat what I've said. We read this in the media. This has not been communicated to us. By the way, not even through the PA. Officially, we have read this. We have not received any formal communication from the Israeli authorities on their position regarding Palestinian elections. And for the time being, we are under the not only impression, but under the view that the elections are going to take place as stipulated in the Oslo Agreement, the annex I quoted, and so far there is no position to the contrary communicated to us from the Israeli authorities. Mrs. Wafa Abdelrahman, she asked a number of challenging questions, and I have to go through them one by one. You mentioned how do we avoid the scenario in 2006? As I said early on, I don't recall any EU statement in 2021 which suggests that we want to have the same problem in 2006. As I said, the European Union has not taken a position on a future Palestinian government, has not taken a position. We have taken a position on holding free, fair, and inclusive elections. We have taken a position on calling upon all parties to abide by democratic principles. We have taken a position on all parties accepting the electoral result without violence. And we now, of course, expect any future government coming out of democratic elections to fully abide by international law and adhere to the international parameters. But as I said, let's await the outcome of the elections and then let's see what the new government does. So I think speculation at this juncture is completely out of the question. And we have not, and I repeat this, formulated any kind of ex-ante conditionality with respect to the participation of any factions in these elections following the issuing of the presidential decree of the 15th of January on parliamentary, presidential, and PNC elections. I think this is important for you also to take note of, please. Second, you mentioned the terrorist list. By the way, allow me to clarify this matter. We have indeed established a list since 2001, which was confirmed then every year, in order to prevent that EU funding, directly or indirectly, supports terrorist entities which are on the restrictive lists. This is a measure to avoid the funding and financing of terrorism. It has nothing to do with our relations as the European Union and the member states with these entities on that list. There is a political relationship which has nothing to do with our legal obligation under this regulation to prohibit funding directly or indirectly, of prohibiting making available financial assets to terrorist organizations or organizations on that list or individuals on that list. And let me clarify, there is not a single Palestinian individual on that list. 6 entities are on that list, not a single individual is on that list. So please make the separation between a prohibition of terrorist funding and our relation, our political relation with any entity. This has nothing to do with 2 separate issues. Now, was there any pressure from the European Union to hold elections? Well, we have been calling for, yes, 15 years to hold free and fair and democratic elections. That we have been doing. But I don't recall that we have stepped up any pressure over the past few months, and certainly not while I was here. I arrived here about a year and 2 months ago. We have not conditioned anything, nor have we put pressure on the Palestinians to hold elections. This we consider to be the responsibility of the Palestinian people. And we are very pleased to see that President Abbas has issued that decree. And I have said in my earlier remarks, in my introductory remarks, that it's about time that the leadership of Palestine is vetted by a democratic process after 15 years of not having had elections. And I would have made that statement in any other country in the world. And I think the fact that you have 93% of registration of Palestinians speaks to it, that also the Palestinian people want to have that democratic renewal and credibility and legitimacy here. So in a way, this is, I think we are fully in sync, in synchrony with the will of Palestinian people of all walks of life. How can we support elections, you said, if elections are not free and fair in 2021? Well, you know, I heard many people from the civil society and saying, listen, unless we have an optimal electoral law, unless we have a situation which I call Denmark or Sweden on a sunny day, unless we have a situation where everything is perfect, then we can have elections. Well, you know, I think it's up to the Palestinian people, it's up to the factions. And I can only say that we had an electoral law, we have an amendment to the electoral law, we had twice meetings in Cairo where the factions could speak out. And unless all the political stakeholders agree, of overhauling certain elements of the law in order to limit the age for candidates, in order to make it easier for independents to participate, and also easier for those who wish not to resign from their positions as NGO office holders or public office holders, unless all the national stakeholders agree to it and do it in a manner which is consistent with the regulatory framework. We from the EU cannot impose anything. This is a sovereign domestic decision. We're taking note of this, but that's a decision of the political stakeholders, and the voters in Palestine have actually to give them their vote on all this. And I trust there will come election day on the 22nd and the 31st of July for the presidentials. Now, Riyad al-Sheikh said, we from the EU have to ensure the integrity of the elections. And you mentioned the case of Nasser al-Qudwa. I have been, as you can imagine, in contact with most political figures here, including Nasser al-Qudwa, whom I respect immensely. You know, and maybe this is also something to all viewers here right now and people on the audience. We are not the responsible agent here. I have the impression that say the EU has to do that, the EU has to do it. We are a partner to the Palestinian people. We are a partner to the PLO and to the PA. But we are not responsible for holding elections. We are not responsible for ensuring democracy. That, my dear colleagues and friends, is your responsibility. That's not my responsibility. I can do my utmost to ensure that you get the support, that we support the CEC, which we have actually been doing for many, many years, that we train electoral observers, that we enable the CEC to have a proper framework, infrastructure, capacity to monitor the elections. I think they are up to the standards. Indeed, we have also funded their building, and hopefully very soon we can inaugurate that. But we are partners. We are not the responsible agents here. So please do not put the burden of proof on us. The burden of proof is on you, not on us. And it's very important to make this distinction. But as you know, we are supporting you. And if there is one agent, one actor in the world which has been staying and remaining steadfast with the Palestinian cause, it is the European Union, more so than any other party in the world. The last 4 years showed to you where solidarity is when it comes to international partnership. Was it from the US? Was it from the Arab world? It was from the EU. We did not cut funding. We maintained the funding at 300 million plus a year. If you add the member states, it's 600 million. Without the EU, probably we wouldn't have the capacity of holding and doing many things today. So please do not make the assumption that we are replacing everything, which is the responsibility of the national authorities, which is the responsibility of the Palestinian people. We are facilitator, we are helpers, we are providers, we are not responsible. I think I want to make this crystal clear to all of you here on this call. I think this is something which I have the impression that some of the speakers seem to insinuate that, you know, unless we do this, unless we do that, nothing can happen. I think this is wrong. I think we're doing many things, but the ultimate responsibility is with the Palestinian people. Yes, Mustafa Ibrahim. EU position on ICC, opening investigation. Very interesting question. Indeed, I also read in the press that member states and other parties made critical comments about this. The EU position is very clear. The International Criminal Court has to be fully protected from any kind of accusation. This is an independent international body. We fully support any kind of investigation which has been decided by this court. We will not comment on the content. We are not co-judging or judging on what has been said or not been said. We support any kind of process which that court has taken in its independent competence and function. So we are not, as I said, commenting on any kind of judgments, opening of trials, investigations. We simply support the very fact that the court has to do its work as it has established its decision-making process. A last comment, I think, from Hani Al-Masri regarding the several presidential decrees which you see as violating Palestinian rights. Allow me to say the following. In a situation where you have a president who for the past 16 years didn't have a parliament which vetted his decrees, his laws, where you had a PA, where there was no parliament to discuss legal initiatives, it goes without saying that you have problems with certain elements of laws, because this very nature of a democratic process of consultation between a parliament and an executive hasn't taken place. And that for the past 16 years. That is one of the key reasons why I think elections need to go ahead, so that you have a parliament. Even if that parliament is imperfect, at least you have a parliament. And then this is a stepping stone, a platform upon which you can improve. And it's also important because that parliament will be an entry point for civil society, for you, for people who have concerns, and you can ventilate, channel your concerns, your objections, your aspirations, your proposals for new legal frameworks through that parliament. And that parliament then can make sure through its majorities to impact on the government. And that is the very nature of a democratic process. That will also allow you to have a better separation of powers between the executive, i.e. the president and the government, the parliament and the judiciary. So many concerns you mentioned and many other concerns which civil society organizations have mentioned can be addressed through a better separation of powers between the three branches of a democratic interaction. So in a way, allow me to summarize, we see this moment or momentum of democratic renewal as very important, because it provides for you an opportunity, A, to renew your democratic institutions, B, give more credibility and legitimacy to your government, C, provide for a better separation of powers and allow that the civil society can actually be more effectively integrated in a public decision-making process. And 4, with a unity government or a coalition government or a government which is consensus after the elections, meaning has a majority, you have a much better sense of reinvigorating a far too long stalled peace process, because you have more Palestinian credibility, legitimacy, and unity to re-engage with Israel and the international community. So that's the reason why the EU supports this process, irrespective of and despite the imperfections, which of course we see as well. But as again said, it's important to move forward and not probably to stay in the past. We certainly try to do our best to work with you, civil society, with the authorities, with the parties, with the international community, to make sure that this time the process is more meaningful and more successful than it was 15 or 16 years ago. Thank you for your attention.
شكرا. في عندنا آخر متحدث الأخ شارلز شماس. تفضل عزيزي شارلز.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, Mr. van Börgstorff, I was very attentive to your last remarks, because I thought they were quite visionary, and pleasantly so. But I have to ask whether the EU, as you understand it, would consider that a violation by the Palestinian or Israeli government of the Oslo Accords is a violation of international law. And the related question is, if I understand correctly, you would assign responsibility to the PLO as the party to the Oslo agreements to ensure its full and effective implementation. Do you feel that the PLO has a role to play here and a responsibility to guide the way in which the Palestinian Authority conducts and administers and organizes the elections? Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
إجاني عدة أسئلة منها سؤال يعني ماذا لو فازت حماس بالانتخابات؟
Sorry. Gentlemen, I'm afraid I have another commitment right now. So my understanding was from 6 to 7, so I'm already 15 minutes above time, and I have another commitment. I have to go to dinner right now. So I can only reply to the question of Charles Hamas, and I fortunately have to leave your call. I'm afraid this was beyond what I thought is acceptable to my agenda. If you can bear with me, I'm very sorry to cut it short, but I really have another obligation right now. But I'm very happy to reply to the point raised by Charles Hamas. Which role for the PLO in the elections? Well, first of all, the decree of President Abbas covers the parliamentary, the presidential, and the PNC elections. But of course, as you know, the factions in Cairo have not agreed on the modus operandi or the content of the PNC elections. This has been postponed, hasn't been addressed. And as you can see from the sequence, parliamentary, presidential, PNC, there is a clear order of priority, and I think rightly so. According to what you have heard from me, we indeed believe that it is of utmost importance to have a democratically elected parliament, which far too long couldn't play this important role, on the basis of which it will have to vote in a government, which will of course be proposed by the president, with the prime minister and the cabinet and whatever factions are on that list. But there will be a government. And then hopefully we're going to have a presidential elections, and then we're going to have the PNC, meaning the PLO elections, the models of which has not been defined yet. I think for the purpose of this exercise, we are very happy that we're moving forward on the parliamentary and on the presidential. And as you know, unless we have a clear idea and all the factions agree on it, how to actually do the elections, where many of the PLO representatives will have to vote from the diaspora, from the outside, except for the 50% which will be automatically represented through the PLC. I think we have to wait a little bit how this is going to materialize. I think the PLO has a very important role to play as the sole representative of the Palestinian people internationally. But the PA has a very important role to play with respect to the 5 million Palestinians living in Gaza, West Bank, and East Jerusalem. And that right now, I think, is the key concern, without underestimating the very important role of the PLO. But again, this has been deliberately put at the very end of this process. And as you could see, the factions also agreed on focusing on what is most urgent and then step by step move on. So we are going to monitor this entire process. I'm in very close contact, as you know, with the Palestinian authorities, with the factions, and also with civil society activists, analysts, think tanks, CSOs, business people, religious leaders, because all of whom have a very important role to play. And as you can imagine as well, we have a very joint, effective coordination mechanism at international level as well. So, Anna Masri, thank you very much for having me on this call here. I hope I was able to reply to some of the questions and concerns of the audience. I look forward to staying very closely engaged with you and your listeners and the practitioners of democracy and those who care dearly about the Palestinian cause and the fate of the Palestinian people and share the Palestinian dream of self-determination and democracy. And you find indeed in me and in the European Union a very convinced friend in this noble cause. Thank you very much, and I wish you a great evening. Thank you.
شكرا لك، وطبعا يسرنا أن ننظم لقاءات أخرى سواء على مستوى واسع أو محدود، لأننا نريد تطوير العلاقات الفلسطينية الأوروبية لما فيه مصلحة الشعوب الأوروبية والشعب الفلسطيني، وهذا ممكن وعلينا مراجعة التجربة الماضية واستخلاص الدروس والعبر. أشكر الأخوات والإخوة الحضور وأذكرهم بأننا سنعقد الدورة الرابعة في سياق سلسلة الندوات حول الانتخابات يوم الاثنين القادم في تمام الساعة 6، وسيكون الموضوع هو الانتخابات الفلسطينية وإسرائيل. نأمل مشاركتكم وشكرا جزيلا لكم. تحياتي.